Away.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Rachelle Martin, tokonga. It's lovely to see some familiar faces. Got Kathy Dwyer right front and centre in the middle and Stephanie Thompson beside her. So two very familiar faces. It's lovely to see you and many others here. I'm really fortunate tonight to be able to talk a little bit about how we might amplify patient voice in rehabilitation service design and development. Particularly interested in why we need to do it, what we should be aiming for, and how we can do it well. I've tried to do it a little bit to give you a sort of a flavour of how I tend to teach as well. So you'll see lots of pictures, not heaps of words tonight, and I hope makes it easier to listen to of an evening. Now, people have been putting where they're from in the chat, which is really fantastic. It's wonderful to see where people are from. But I'm wondering if people could also put in, I've just put it in there now, what's one thing that you've learned from listening to someone who has received rehabilitation from the service that you work in or has used any health system? So maybe have a think about what's one thing you've learned by listening to the people that use your services. Just a word, a phrase, an idea, just something that you've learned by listening. All right. So there we go. That's that. I put some spring blossom up to remind ourselves that spring is on the way. What I want to start with today is just a reflection on a fairly standard health interaction that you might be familiar with. So it's not uncommon for a patient to come to see a clinician for help. And a clinician will listen and examine the patient, and then from that will formulate a plan. And maybe that plan will involve giving the patient some instructions or some recommendations. Sorry, I think I got muted accidentally. Someone muted me. It might have been Fee. So I'll just go back and say, I'll start from here. So a patient comes to a clinician for help. A clinician listens to and examines the patient, and the clinician will formulate a plan and instruct the patient on potentially some recommendations, things that they could do. Now, patients may or may not be able to engage with that plan for a whole variety of reasons. But from that interaction, health outcomes, good and bad, positive and negative, are co-produced. So I think most people would recognise good outcomes are more likely to happen if, firstly, the patient comes and accesses support. Secondly, if the clinician and the patient communicate effectively. Thirdly, if they develop a shared understanding of a problem and they generate a mutually sort of acceptable plan. And so basically the key message I'm wanting to say here is that it's the interaction between these two, a health provider and a patient, a client, that's going to determine what the outcome are. Both are active players, actors in this co-produced space. So now let's just move on to what a health service might look like. So typically a health service is lots of people, organizations, structures, processes, systems, planning a system and determining processes, working out what's going to work best, often dictated to by funders, and what's happened historically, and all sorts of things. And families, individuals, whānau, try to access those services and maybe can or can't engage with those services. And from these, outcomes are created. What's often missing is this arrow, this ability to understand and listen and hear what people within the system need to be able to, or how they can best engage to co-produce a sort of good health outcomes together. So implicit within healthcare service design is often this idea that that health services create a product and that people consume the product. But that isn't how health services work. Health outcomes are generated through this co-production, through a relationship, and through the way things are done. And so I guess what I'm trying to talk about tonight is that yellow arrow might look like, so that we're more likely to create more positive outcomes for individuals and for populations and families. So why do we need to do it? Now, this is a bit of a New Zealand context for those that have come from overseas, but you'll hear a little bit. Firstly, I want to introduce you to the idea of the stick and the carrot. Now, you may or may not be familiar with a stick and a carrot. Sticks are really good at if you're wanting to have a little encouragement from behind to move in the direction that you're supposed to go, and carrots are supposed to be more exciting things that you move towards. And so in terms of amplifying patient voice, there's sticks and carrots within the New Zealand health system. So here's the first stick, so to speak. It's a carrot as well, but I'm calling it a stick. We need to do it. Why we need to do it is because the New Zealand health strategy that's just come out has prioritised voice at the heart of the system, giving people, whānau and communities greater control and influence over decisions about their health and the design of their health services, and embedding their voices in system planning, delivery, and reporting on healthcare as one of the top six priority areas. So there's a really strong obligation for us, a responsibility for us to be moving this way. It's the direction that we're going. And of course, this is informed within New Zealand very strongly by Te Tiriti, the Treaty of Waitangi, which we are working to try and uphold. This one's more of a, we should do it. So the New Zealand Health Quality and Safety Commission has put out a code of expectations for health entities engaging with consumers and whānau. And you can see that they have health entities must apply these expectations. So people need to be, entities need to be co-designing with consumers, whānau and communities. So there's collective development of priorities, processes, and that there's involvement at all levels. That we need to be including consumer experience data to inform improvements in health services, particularly with a focus on reducing health inequities for Māori, Pacific and disabled people. There's cross-sector collaboration that's being encouraged, ensuring information and resources are accessible, resourcing consumers so that they can contribute and engage meaningfully, and then making sure when new services are set up, that they're actually set up in a way that consumers, whānau and communities are needing to engage at all levels. All right, so that's the way that services are commissioned. So that's the we need to, we should, and finally we should want to. So I assume as healthcare providers that all of us have a strong commitment to ensuring that everybody that we provide services to achieves equitable outcomes, equitable access and equitable experiences. Now, this is a framework for measuring health equity and healthcare equity, but I think it's just quite useful because it talks about both access into services, transitions between services, and quality of care, and then post-discharge, and how all of those are impacting on equity of health outcomes. We'll come back to it more, but just to say that that essentially, what I think we've all got this commitment to try and be more equitable And this is why this amplification of patient voice is so important. I want to make one other point, though, that whenever I've talked with and have been teaching healthcare providers who are involved or start to get involved in amplifying patient voice, they talk about the benefit they get as clinicians, that the privilege of listening to people's voices, of being able to act and make change within the services, that it's very empowering for them. And it often really connects clinicians back to that sense of purpose that they have, especially in times when they're feeling quite despondent about how things are or overstretched. So I think there's a carrot in that as well, that actually it's a really rewarding way of working, to be listening to patients and amplifying their voices. Okay, so what should we be aiming for? I'm just keeping an eye on the time as well to make sure I don't go over. So some of these resources have come from not rehabilitation, not healthcare at all, actually. So this is a spectrum of public participation that I use quite a lot in my research. And it really just shows that there's lots of different levels, I guess, of participation. And what I'm encouraging people to do is to gradually increase their involvement of people. Don't feel that you need to go straight to the end point. Start moving along that spectrum, and so that people are gradually participating more over time. And you might find in some areas, like your clinical interactions, that there's quite a lot of collaboration and empowerment happening. All right, so that's happening at an individual level, but does that happen at a service level? Are you collaborating with patients and empowering patients in the way you run your team, for instance, or the way that your whole service runs? It may be at the stage you're just informing, but what steps could you take to move on to consulting? What steps could you take on to move to involvement? All right, so I find that quite a useful spectrum just to be aware of as we're going through. The other thing is aiming for is sustained commitment, and this actually getting the way we do things around here to become the norm is really, really tough. As this comic shows, changing culture is a really tough ask. So I'm not saying that this is an easy thing to do, but it is something that we can take active steps for, not to get to the end point, but just what's the next step on this pathway that we can move down across that spectrum. I'll come back to this in a little minute. Then I wanted to talk a little bit about genuine participation and meaningful contribution. And this particular piece of work has come from more thinking about how evidence and knowledge is mobilized and embedded in health services. So it's a little bit tangential, but really I just want you to focus more on these two columns here: key aspects and mechanisms of action. So when we bring together people as active and equal partners, when we value all knowledge, when we use a creative approach, and when we use iterative prototyping techniques. So that is a backwards and forwards trying of things with an ongoing communication. Is this working? What could we do better? Then those things, the shared understanding, identifying meeting needs, making sure people have power, have a voice, a sense of ownership, and the building of trust and confidence is going to lead to more relevant, more usable, implementable change that will lead to health outcomes. Right? So just having a think about that there's ways of doing hearing and listening to voices that's going to make a difference and is worth investing in. This is the last sort of overview slide, and this one has come from sustainability research, so it might fit quite well into Fee's talk later. But really what it's just saying is that it's still useful, even though this sounds airy-fairy, to make sure that knowledge co-production is focused. that it's context, that it's situated within a specific context. You've got a specific goal that you're working on, that it's interactive, there's a to and fro, and that people are being recognised for the different skills that they have. People, patients and consumers and whānau come with lived experience and come with a knowledge which is valuable that you will never have. But how can they be given the confidence to share that? And in what ways can we make sure that we're recognising and valuing the specific contribution that they bring? So a few sort of back resources you can pop in your back pocket for reading, and these PowerPoints will be available, so you'll be able to get the links from them. So how can we do it well? Well, this is a bit of what's the word? There's lots of different ways. So what I thought I'd do is I'll try and be all interactive, and in the chat I'm going to put this link to this Padlet page, and you should all be able to go onto it and start adding your ideas. So we end up with today a whole list of ideas that we'll send out for people to be able to take away and use. So what you do is you click on the link. You shouldn't have to enter anything. It should just take you straight in. You can type in your ideas. You can vote ideas up, and you can also comment on other people's ideas. So you can add to people's ideas. So that's going to be sort of running in the background as I am chatting. I'm just trying to see if I can find it so that I can see what's happening, but I have lost it somewhere behind all my screens. That's all right. I'll let Fee and him look at that and make some comments. All right, so some ideas from me. So first idea is about genuine curiosity. A feedback form won't do it. People hate filling them in, and usually the information that you get is very, very limited in how it can inform change. So taking the opportunity to set up specific opportunities to genuinely chat with people about their experiences is worthwhile. I know of one person who set up, they had an inpatient rehabilitation setting. They set up a coffee group, a cake and coffee afternoon, sort of 4 times a year, where they invited all ex-patients back and their families, and they could come, and they had a big celebration to show off their progress. And as part of that, they said, based on what you know now, what would you change about the services? What could we do better? So it was a celebratory event, but it was also a much more meaningful way of gathering information. Or it might be they had a specific question that they said, we've got some specific area we're really worried about or thinking we could do better. Have you got any ideas about that? People loved sharing their ideas in that sort of setting. Another idea is patient and whānau journey mapping. Now, journey mapping is used in all sorts of ways, and it can be very numbers generated, and it can be very much about tracking where people are at and trying to make sure they're consumers, that they work well. I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about this ability to capture people's stories, not just in your service, but across services. So, because people don't just encounter your service. They've been a lot of places probably before they got to you, and they're going to be going more places after they leave. So what is their journey like as a whole whānau? And what are the barriers, what are the bits that get in the way that make it challenging for them? And from that, you can often identify some key areas that your service, or key areas your service could focus on to really make sure that you're building in this continuous progress. And it doesn't have to be as pretty as that, although this one's quite pretty as well. This is one I found about mapping the caregivers' experiences. What is it like to be a caregiver? This is of people who are requiring palliative care, but capturing the things that make it harder or easier. So think broadly in terms of the stakeholders, the people that are accessing your services, not just patients, but also their caregivers, family, and broader networks. Coming back to this, those sort of journey mapping exercises are a really good way of identifying where inequities might be coming in and how they can compound to become an inequitable outcome that's quite considerable. Because if you're having issues with access, transitions are difficult, quality of care is inequitable, and then there's discharge issues are inequitable, then you're going to lead to this sort of cumulative impact of inequity, which can lead to quite profound differences in health outcomes for certain groups. So this can be useful to think about journey mapping in terms of exploring what might be contributing to those inequity gaps. Third idea is trying to get it into the sustained way of doing this, sustained commitment, the way we do things around here. So regular audit and review is basically what I'm saying. You have to put it into the regular thing you do as a team, that you prioritize it as your team meetings. How do we set in this agenda that it's constantly coming up for discussion and you're constantly thinking about it? I know many people are working on their own professional development goals and their learning plans, and these are really great activities to put into those to both benefit yourself in terms of your career progression, but also the service that you work in and your sense of satisfaction that, hey, I can make a difference, I can make change that's really positive. So these resources are taken from Coalition for Personalised Care, which is a UK-based group which is working with the NHS. And I think this one was Birmingham-based, and they're specifically trying to understand how, I'm about to finish, how they could support patient voice within services. And they have some practical steps that you can take. Some of these things I've covered already, regular review and feedback, etc. What I want to encourage you to think about is the knowledge to action framework. You may or may not have seen this. It's where people are bringing together, often it's about bringing together evidence, like it might be clinical guidelines or systematic reviews, or bringing in knowledge and then trying to implement it into a cycle, an iterative cycle of audit and review to really improve services. What if we brought the patient voice in as another form of evidence that was informing, or another form of knowledge that's informing that whole cycle? And what would it be like if patients were involved in that whole cycle and actually making sense of what was happening behind and throughout that whole cycle? So to finish, I was thinking about an arrow that goes backwards, a yellow arrow that goes backwards. Maybe we need to also be thinking about an arrow that goes forwards. So yeah, but actually when I thought about it, what we really need is an interactive to and fro iterative process that's sustained and systematic, and we commit to make sure that we're really hearing and benefiting from the knowledge that patients and their whānau can bring to the way we run our services.